Hey everyone, this week sees the start of our new teaching series for this term. And this term we're going to be focusing on a character in the Old Testament of the Bible, a man called Abraham. Abraham was significant not just because he's the forefather of the Jewish nation of Israel, but also because he's the forefather of everyone who has a faith in Jesus Christ. And we're going to see that as we look at four key aspects of his journey, four parts of his story. Over the course of this term, we're going to look at Abraham's calling, we're going to be looking at Abraham's persuasion of God, we're going to be looking at Abraham's sacrifice, and we're going to be looking at Abraham's legacy. Today, we're starting by looking right at the start of Abraham's story, which can be found in Genesis chapter 12. And this is where God comes to Abraham and calls him. He speaks promises over Abraham, and this is where Abraham chooses to believe in faith that those promises are going to take place. Today I'd suggest you read two different parts of the Bible to follow along. First, have a look at Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 5, and then read Genesis 15, verses 1 to 6. Try reading them in the NIV and the Message versions of the Bible. It'll give you some alternative perspectives. Faith. It's not a word that is used a lot in our modern society, and yet we do see the impact of it all around us. I want to read to you the definition of faith. This is what it says. Faith is the complete trust or confidence in someone or something. I'm just going to repeat those few words again. Complete trust or confidence. Wow, that's a lot of trust or confidence. I love reading both in the Bible and post the Bible being written about people's stories and how God calls those people. God doesn't seem to have any sort of exhaustive list of how he calls people, how he speaks to them. In the Bible alone, we see a variety of different ways, everything from dreams to angels, talking donkeys, writing hands on the wall. We see lots of different ways that God uses creativity to call people. But I think even more remarkably than the calling is the response of people acting in faith to the words that God says. Even when the evidence of what God is promising or what God has spoken over those people seems ludicrous, seems ridiculous. Abraham was one such man who displayed this attitude and act of faith. God one day decided to speak to him. The Bible doesn't tell us how. Maybe through prayer or vision, and maybe audibly. Either way, God tells Abraham what he's going to do for him. He says, "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." Now, let's look at Abraham. He has a small family. Him, his wife, and his nephew Lot. Not exactly a great nation. He's old, 75 years old at this point. His wife is old, past childbearing years, and barren. She couldn't have kids. His name was not great at all or well known, and the land that God had promised him was already occupied by the Canaanites. We have become a culture who relies heavily on evidence before we will make a decision. I wonder if we were in Abraham's position and looked at the evidence that was before us, would we choose to believe? Sadly, I think we would not. But Abraham does believe. He disregards the evidence in favour of God, who has spoken to him and initiated this relationship with him. He shows true faith, and the Bible says it was credited to him as righteousness. Now, if you take this story in isolation, you'd be forgiven for thinking that people like Abraham are people with supernatural faith. And I grant you that there are people who take leaps of faith in this world seemingly easier than other people. But I think if you did think that, you'd be wrong. You only have to read a little bit further into Genesis, that, for example, the second half of chapter 12 or chapter 16, check them out if you want, and you'll see a different side to this man, Abraham. You'll see where actually his faith and his confidence seem to have departed him, and he tries to take matters into his own hands on a number of occasions to deal with getting his family that God had promised him, or to keep himself safe. So check those out. Abraham was not a man who had perfect confidence and perfect faith all the time. So if you're like that and you're like me, then you're in good company. But what I want to challenge you and myself to think about is this. If God were to speak to you or me today, would we trust what he says, despite the evidence that is before us? Faith requires trust, and trust comes when we have relationship with one another and relationship with the person that we're putting that trust in. But God does this amazing thing with us. God comes to us. At the start of Abraham's story, what we see is that God comes to Abraham. Before Abraham has done anything, God speaks this amazing promise over him. God doesn't say, because you've worked really hard, Abraham, I'm going to make you into this great nation. Or because I think you're really special, I'm going to make you into this great nation. Abraham hasn't done anything remarkable as far as the Bible is concerned. But God comes to him. God calls him. It's like God saying, I want to have a relationship with you, and I'm going to make the first move, and I'm going to build this trust relationship with you, and I'm going to do whatever it takes for you to grow in trust with me. And I believe that God says that same thing to you and me today. My hope for us is that we would seek relationship with God, and that through seeking relationship with God, we would see our trust being built, so that when God speaks to us about something, when God calls us to take action on something or to believe in him, even if the evidence is stacked against us, we will place our trust in him. Today, I dare you to ask God to help you increase your trust in him, and then see what happens.